Alright, so as I've mentioned in a lot of my... I didn't even fucking do anything, did it? In a lot of my previous videos, or well, no, not in my previous video that I made about MDMA and stuff, that was usually like my drug of choice for like years when I was younger. I was always much more into like sort of serotogenic stuff, and yeah, I'd had like limited experiences with weed. Sorry, all over the place. I was just thinking in my head about another video I'm going to make after this, so I was just limited experiences with speed and amphetamines in general, and I in my brief experiences with it, I didn't really like it. I remember having it once when I was a teenager, and I was so confused by it. But to be fair, I was at like the worst party ever, with just like people I didn't know, and it was really depressing. And me and my mate took it. It was like paste, like speed paste. It smelled of piss, and it was like yellow, and it was really bad. And we just sat around all night. We didn't do anything. We just like were pretty much just fucking like staring at a wall, and we were really uncomfortable all night. And I had it in my head like speed is shit. You know, why does anyone take speed? Anyway, for years I always regarded it as a bit of a weird drug that I didn't want to get into. And eventually the reason I got into it, or we got into it, was because I tried this stuff called 4FA, which you can't get anymore as far as I'm aware. It was pretty great. It's kind of like probably about 2/3 of an MDMA experience, but more, it operates more, I guess, on your dopamine receptors, but it's similarly quite euphoric and fun, and like a lot of people, I guess, were promoting it as a kind of MDMA alternative, although it is quite different. I think its mechanisms and probably the feeling of it, but if you don't have that much of a reference point, I guess it's like kind of similar. You know, it's like a fun, you know, whatever. You can't really redose it. If you redose it, it just becomes very sort of stimmy, you know, as in, you know, akin to a stimulant, and you get a lot of sort of stim related side effects, and that kind of gave us the feeling, you know, of like, oh right, you know, it wasn't fun. The end of it wasn't fun when you had those side effects, but like, I don't know how to describe it. It just like opened that door, I guess. And I started thinking, you know, yeah, I'd like to try speed again because it's really cheap and people say it's really nice and you can mix it with other stuff. So the first thing we did was they were pills. They were like, it was proper pharmaceutical grade amphetamines. I don't remember the type specifically, but they were in pills, and it was pretty good because, you know, it was like pharmaceutical and you could just dose it quite easily. The problem with amphetamine powder is if you have pure amphetamine powder, I think like 10 mg or something will get you like fucked. I don't know, like, don't take my word for it, but I think if you have pure amphetamine powder, like, it's just so strong that like it's just crazy. But most amphetamine powder, we would buy like a few grams and sniff all of it and be like okay. I never really felt, you know, like I was like out of control with it. I never felt off my tits on it, although you don't really with speed. That's the thing, it's quite deceptive, because it kind of makes you so focused and sharp, you don't feel like fucked like you do on other drugs. And anyway, yes, we had that, and I guess we mixed it with something, and we enjoyed it. And then, in doing this, we would then take GHB at the end, and I kind of forgot all the weird stuff I will inevitably get into when discussing this, but we basically we started talking about like it's so difficult to know what angle to sort of approach this from. I started on GHB at the end of the night. I started talking about like a lot of my like sexual proclivities and whatever, basically, and it became like we started talking about porn and like other women and like other men and shit, and it became like very like, have you ever taken GHB? You'll know, like, it makes you look really fucking horny and kind of like degenerate, and if you mix it with speed, it's fucking like crazy. You just become like derangedly horny, like it's insane, it's just crazy. and into things that you normally wouldn't. I mean, I've kind of referenced this in previous videos, but I definitely think it made us both pretty weird. Because I should say, it wasn't just me who had that experience of doing drugs and getting it. Like, my ex, she got into really weird stuff as well. Like, she kind of became obsessed with like me sleeping with other women and stuff, basically, and things like that. Yeah. So anyway, we started talking about all this stuff, and it was previously been something that was a very tense subject in our relationship, as it is in basically all relationships. You know, like most of the time, people in relationships, they are like attracted to other people, and it's weird and uncomfortable and whatever. And it became like more of a nice thing. It was just like, you know, it's not like, it became like we were just able to talk about it, and it was pretty fucking cool, actually, in a way. Like, you know, and then we started like showing each other like. Sorry, I appreciate this video is probably a bit like disgusting for someone else to listen to. I'll try and not focus too much on this aspect of it, but it's kind of fundamental part of our experience with it, so it's hard not to talk about. But we started then showing each other like porn that we were into and stuff, and like then it became like we would just like watch the porn together, and you know, all sorts of shit would happen, and like it would get quite weird and sort of like sometimes kind of cuckish in like both directions, or just like obsessive, and it just became like we would just watch so much porn. And it got to a point then when we would do these sessions, like that is what the whole thing would become about. It used to be at the end when we take the GHB, then it got to a point where basically within like 2 hours of taking speed, we would just be like, one of us would just bring up, one of us would like raise the topic of like porn, you know. And once you start talking about it, it's the thing with speed, like your mind gets fixated on something and you just can't stop. And once we cross that threshold, the rest of the night would just be about porn and sex and shit, and like we would go like fucking, you know, like deep into it. And it became basically this weird hobby, like it was chem sex, I guess, you know, like, and it became this weird hobby, like, and sort of like doing these like 3-day benders of speed and GHB and watching loads of porn and going into quite weird spaces that were liberating in a way, but could be quite unpleasant as well, and quite like weird for our sort of self-esteem. In some ways good, like really genuinely good, and in other ways definitely, as you can probably imagine, like a bit weird for a couple to do. I think it's good in a way. I think it's better than being like repressed. I guess it was like exposing the enjoyable but maybe also simultaneously quite ugly realities of our like psyches and shit, and that is just what it is. It wasn't, you know, I don't know. So it was like yeah, it was strange anyway, and the more because it was like a kind of liberating thing, we then became quite obsessed with doing it, and a couple of times we even stayed up for like 4 days, and yeah, it then became like I became a bit reluctant to do it because I thought, I know if we take this, all we're going to do is watch porn for like 4 days and not sleep, and that's, you know, like fun, but it's also a bit, it's not real fun. It's like pleasure. It's just like purely like pleasure, you know. So we yeah, we got really into doing this. I used to do it all the time. The other aspect, I don't know, I'm trying to remember what else we would ever even do on it. We would just talk, basically. You just walk around and fucking pace around and talk. And the feeling of it, I must say, I grew to love the feeling of speed. Like speed-paced, I don't know, man. Like, I loved the fact that you could snort big lines of it. And again, this applies to shit quality speed-paced and stuff, and powder, like not proper amphetamine. Because again, if you took the amount, like one time we were doing it and we've been doing shitloads, and I googled like how much amphetamine powder should you take, and people were like, you should take 10 mg, or you might feel fine, but then you could die if you take more than, you know, X amount. And I was thinking, shit, we're gonna die. Like I started thinking like we're about to die, and that was not the case. There's a big difference between street speed kind of powder and pure, you know, pharma grade amphetamine powder. Anyway, yeah, you just like, you don't feel it that strongly in the way that you do with MDMA and stuff, but that becomes part of what's good about it in a way. You just have like a buzz, you know, you just feel energetic, you can talk a lot, things are, you know, it's just things become interesting. You can quickly become a bit stressy or a bit like kind of jittery or nervous on it, but it's I grew to find it very enjoyable, and a lot of drugs I used to do, they don't really appeal to me anymore. It does still appeal to me. That feeling really does appeal to me, because it's like I'm very hesitant to do it, because the last thing I need now is to get into all that fucking weird shit again, and like, you know, doing it on my own as well would just be weird. And obviously doing that with my ex would be fucking like weird beyond belief. Yeah, and anyway, the feeling of it though, yeah, it's nice, man. I really got into it. I'd say probably it's like one of my favourite drug feelings, partially because of how subtle it is, and it kind of builds up over time, and you're still yourself and you're still present, but you're just more like stimulated basically, and yeah, it's cool. It's a good one for just fucking chatting about shit and doing whatever, if you can resist the urge to, like, you know, like, because people have said the same thing when they do it themselves, you know, if they can like do it and focus on shit they enjoy, or work, or making art or whatever, then it's really good. But as soon as they start watching porn, the night is over. You just cannot stop watching porn on it. It's crazy. Like, you just, even if you're not taking it with GHB, if you start watching porn, you will just watch porn for the rest of the night, even if you can't get a boner. Like, you'll just be watching porn anyway. And you stop and you're like, okay, let's stop for a bit, and then 2 minutes later we'll be watching porn again. It's crazy. Yeah, so we'd start doing that. One time I had this bizarre experience on it. It's so hard to explain it, and I've tried to, and I can never do this story justice, and it just sounds ridiculous, but I started developing, it was like kind of Tourette's. It happened once mildly, and I don't really remember, but I remember it happened, and I started speaking in these weird voices uncontrollably. I swear to God, it was uncontrollable. I'm not the sort of person to like pretend something like, you know, I wouldn't want that type of attention. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was not, yeah. And the first time it happened, I started speaking in weird voices, like cowboy voices, and like Indian voices, and like weird accents, and like doing like pitch bending and stuff, and like it was like every word would be in a different voice, and I would do these crazy, like, I could never do it, so I couldn't even do an impression of it now. It was like actually impressive, and it started happening once, and then it happened this one time a little bit. I looked it up, and there was kind of some precedent for it. You know, people develop like tics and things and Tourette's type symptoms. I think like some people suggested to me I might have like OCD or something, and I think maybe that was what was happening. It would like exacerbates some kind of OCD type symptoms I have. I don't know, but yeah. So then it happened again this other time, and it was so fucking weird. It went on for hours, and I was like talking like a freak, and I'd be like, one word would be like, I'd be like a cowboy, and it'd be like this really long syllable with like pitch bending up, and then I would start speaking in like an Indian voice, and then I would like start speaking in Spanish, and then I would like, and it was just like, it was crazy, and I couldn't control it, and I was expressing normal thoughts. My brain was completely normal, but all my thoughts were coming out in this insane way, like I'm not even going to try and do it, because it would sound so fucking weird. It would be like embarrassing to try and do, and it wouldn't be the same as it was. It was actually incredible. Like, that's the thing, was she, like, my ex was like getting really worked up about it at the time, and I had, to be fair, like kind of a bad reaction to it that was not very fair on me, and she was quite mean about it, and it made it quite upsetting. I started even to cry at one point. We were very deep into it, you know, we'd been awake for days, and I was like, maybe she was crying. I think maybe we were both crying. And I was trying to like talk to her, and I was being really nice, and I was trying to communicate, like, I can't help it, I'm sorry, like, but I'm, you know, I was saying all this in like a cowboy voice and stuff. If you can imagine such a bizarre thing. And yeah, so it eventually faded, basically, as the night went on. It eventually faded, but we were like, it was weird. It was a really weird incident. And there were a couple of other times, like, the time we stayed up for 4 days was pretty bad. Like, I was feeling pretty, like, bad by the end of that. And it would make you feel weird all week, and I find that after doing it, we would have like really low impulse control. Like, I would just start eating like sweets all the time and shit the following week, and I just couldn't control my lifestyle. I just wanted to watch TV and just smoke weed and eat food, and I just didn't want to do anything else. And at the time, we were really into watching like bad movies. We just watched like the worst Jason Statham films we could find, and just like smoke weed and eat sweets and stuff. And it became quite an unhealthy hobby, I guess. And this was actually, I was something I fairly early on was like, this is not very good to do, and I don't really want to do it anymore. She was much more keen to do it than I was in this case. We kind of went, it was the other way around with some drugs over the years. We sort of, went back and forth on that. Yeah, I don't remember the last time that we did it. But it was, I don't know. It felt to me as well like, I had a song about it. I'm going to put it at the end of this video, because it's a good song. It's called Always Tweaking, and it was about like, it's about doing speed, but it's also about like feeling like that all the time, and that partially maybe that's why you gravitate towards it, because it's like, I've always kind of feel like I'm on like speed or something, and I also was smoking a lot of weed, and that can kind of give you that feeling as well, especially if you're smoking like sativas, and like, yeah, it felt like it drew, like it was a more exaggerated version of the way like I was anyway. So for me it became not great. The thing with it again as well, is like you can take so much of it before you realise. So you can end up like, having seizures and overdoses and heart attacks and stuff because you don't really feel it that much. So you can just take so much, and then suddenly, half an hour to an hour later, you're like, your heart is like pounding and it's going crazy. And that never really happened, but I was always freaking out about it. I was always worrying about my heart. I was always thinking my chest hurts and shit like that. And the thing to remember with that is like 99% of the time, you're having an anxiety attack and your muscles are tense and you're imagining things. You don't feel it here. If you're having like heart problems, you don't really feel like pain, like especially like muscle type pain here. It doesn't, it's not really how it works. Obviously you should still like, pay attention to it and definitely like cease taking it if you're like having those symptoms. But I used to, every single time we did it, there'd be a point in the night where for a good like hour or two, I was like pacing around, like freaking out about my heart, and I wouldn't sit still. And she kept being like, just chill, like, your heart rate will go down. And I was like, no, I don't want to. Because as soon as I sat, I'd feel so stressed out and jittery and anxious. And I just wanted to keep moving around. And that would just exacerbate it. And it becomes like, obviously it's like hard to piss, it's hard to like get a boner and shit. Everything becomes like, your hands become like numb and cold and shit, and you don't get enough blood to your extremities and shit because it's a vasoconstrictor, and you don't eat for days, and it's a bit like cocaine or something, in the sense that once you start, you just are not going to want to stop. Like, you're not going to be able to, most people are not going to have the willpower to sniff a line of speed and just to not do any more. It's really fucking moreish. And it never really ends nicely. It always ends with you feeling like shit. And I think also, I have a theory on amphetamines, that we have this idea, right, that like, artists, they peak at a certain age, and then they lose their talent suddenly. I don't believe that to be the case. I think what happened was a lot of the most famous artists of our time, and mostly in the 60s and 70s, I guess, were, especially the late 60s, they were using a lot of amphetamines, and when they stopped doing that, they had, not only they didn't have the same songwriting ability that they had, the same energy and like motivation and drive, but they also had fucked up their brains a bit, and it made it really hard. Most of these guys, they went through the same cycle of like 10 years or so of being really famous, doing loads of drugs, culminating in them kind of getting sober, having families, trying to sort themselves out, and becoming like not very interesting as artists. And Bob Dylan, for example, he was known as a user of amphetamines, and he said that when he said that he used to write his songs in like 10 minutes. When he made Blood on the Tracks, which in my opinion is by far his best album, maybe the best album ever, I think, he said that he said, I had to consciously learn to do what I had to consciously learn to do over periods of hours that I had previously been able to do unconsciously in 10 minutes. So he had to kind of relearn how to be Bob Dylan. He had to almost copy himself and do all this. And this was later in his life when he had like chilled out and shit and he was more like sober. Bowie was known as like heavily abusing stimulants and shit, mostly cocaine to be fair in his case, but he definitely did a lot of amphetamines too. And again, like, he stopped, and I know he made some really good stuff after he got clean, but that was, a lot of that was immediately following getting clean. And he then had years following that where his music was like, it was very different to how it was. I guess some people like that period. I don't like it as much. And I think he was more like, definitely like inspired in those early days. And then it seemed like for years he had kind of like lost it somewhat, you know, and then he sort of, it was almost like he had years to recover, and then he came back with like The Next Day and Black Star and stuff. And a lot of these other artists, they have similar trajectories, and I think a lot of that was to do with amphetamines. I don't remember how I got onto this. I guess my point is that I think it can allow people to have these like bursts of fucking like, you know, brilliance and creativity and energy, but that comes from somewhere and it will come crashing down eventually, and that can lead to like really low testosterone, dopamine issues, sexual dysfunction, bad memory, anxiety, lack of motivation, I think probably most notably lack of drive. And that was something I definitely was battling a bit when we were doing it a lot. In the weeks following it, I would have to really force myself to do stuff, and that's terrible. That is a really bad way to live, because if you're unhappy, like if you've abused your serotonin receptors and you're unhappy, at least if you still have motivation and drive, you can resolve that situation. But if you don't have motivation and drive, you can't do anything. You don't even have the motivation and drive to fix your own problems, you know. So it's a really bad thing to lose that, in my opinion. But yeah, so it can be a lot of fun, or at least it was sometimes a lot of fun for me and for us, and I still kind of remember it fondly in a way. We were lucky, we were older and much more mature, we never did the same type of damage with it that we did with MDMA and stuff, so I don't look back on it and like kind of shiver. I look back on it and just think, oh, that was kind of crazy. It was kind of like the stuff we used to talk about and do on it was like there's times I think, like, if our neighbours can hear us, man, Jesus Christ. And I'm sure there were times when they did. Oh man, it was fucking, yeah, it was actually really fun though. Like, it was fun, and it was like, yeah, like that side of it was like real fucking good. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very like, I know that those experiences we were having, like making too much of a habit of that, I think can destroy a person. And the weeks following, I would be like obsessed with porn, you know, and like that's not good either. And I've noticed a lot of people who get into stimulants and stuff, they start to lead quite degenerate lifestyles. And it can turn you into a bit of a degenerate, and it can make you a bit weird and crazy and fucks up your impulses and makes you, impulsive, and like alters your impulses, I think. I talked about this more in a video I did about porn. Have a look at that if you're like, interested. But that in that video I kind of talked about, I guess, some of the effects I think it had on me, and that it did have on both of us, like sexually and stuff. But anyway, yeah. Feel free, please share your experiences if you have any with amphetamines in the comments. Obviously, I know there's like a whole, they're used for like ADHD and stuff, which I personally think they're very much overused in that regard, and it's quite upsetting to see And a lot of these negative effects of it are very much present in people even who are using small, daily doses, and the doses are sometimes not that fucking small. But I'm talking more about like recreational amphetamine use. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what people's experiences are with that. Cool. Look out the door, past it, blast it, shook out your thoughts. Duck out your shorts, farmers market, look out for pork. Life is short to fuck a bit, awful forces, more than enough of it. Sure get stuck a bit, awful luck with it. That's what rhythm's for, like sitting indoors cause you live in a war. Hitting the floor, shit you did like a written report. Riddling thoughts, kids use this, they can even be forced. Hitting real sore, shit and feel bored. In hours lost. Where are your feelings in the shower off? Where were your feelings when the towers dropped? Powered off. Found a shit in 4-day weekends, drowning it and saw days peaking. Boys get weak and drowning, wish for shore-based beacon. Always leaking, always speaking, always freaking, always tweaking, even when I'm not. Round this bitch, your pool ain't creaking, down a pit and always shrieking. Always creaking, found the shit, it's all they're speaking. Always bleeding, always needing, always reasons. Full day seasons, bull race screaming. That's what's so funny about it. Turn into a monster, running around it. Nothing without it. Stuck in the house with it. Rubbing your snout and dick.